If one had to choose a single most important artist in America today, there would be little doubt that it would be Mr. Marcel Duchamp. We might say that since his famous nude descended upon us at the Armory Show in 1913, art and artists in the United States have never been the same. His prophetic genius has anticipated what we today consider to be the chief concerns of the avant-garde: kinetics, optics, mass media, mathematics, and engineering. Mr. Duchamp, would you agree with me if I said that at least a few of these ideas were already contained in your painting, Nude Descending a Staircase?
Not quite so, but as a gesture, not knowing what I was doing anyway, it did help put the mind of the people onto another direction that they had been used to. And a full crop of young artists who became old artists, like Bellows and all these, took the direction of art in entirely new one. I'm not exactly responsible, just happened to be at the Armory Show, in which all these cubists and futurists helped the American people to think differently about art.
Mm-hmm. But what about the idea of motion?
The motion was there too. At least it had been with the futurists as well.
Mm-hmm.
They had Bala had done a dog walking on a leash. I mean, on the leash, and you could see 20,000 leashes and 20,000 legs, animal legs. But the movement was only painted, or at least described on the canvas. So it's only a little later that actual movement took place in, for example, in the mobiles of Calder, and in my bicycle wheel also.
Mm-hmm. Tell me, in your bicycle wheel, did you expect or want people to spin it or move it in any way?
No, I did not. I used it for my own use. I mean, I didn't see anything in it except to have it in my studio. It never was shown anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Never was shown even to people as a thing. It was a gadget, if you want to say, for an artist in his own studio to see a movement of the wheel, which is a very simple movement, and can become aesthetic if you want to give it the adjective. And it was a pleasure, like a fire in a fireplace, you see, that moves all the time and helps having something moving in your silent studio and when you work or something. That was purely a gadget, and it became important only much, much later when people discovered it and thought they might talk about it and say something.
Mm-hmm. It was the only ready-made, as I recall, that included movement in it.
Yes. Yes, there's none other.
Mm-hmm. Did you, just to go back to the nude for a moment, did you, I know there were certain studies for the nude, did you at any point use a model?
Never.
Never? Mm-hmm.
Never, no, never, because it was intended not to be a representation of the anatomy of a nude at all. It was more giving the line force lines, or I don't know how you call it, but indicating the descending of the nude as a sort of skeleton or robot, if you wish, that has no anatomy because it moves all the time and there's no final definite form. It's a series of lines parallel to one another, more or less, and going downstairs, you see.
Mm-hmm. You know, I'm aware that at Cordier and Ekstrom have just published a limited edition of facsimile reproductions of manuscript notes of yours from 1912 to 1921. Do any of these notes refer to the nude in any way?
No, hardly any, because there's the time, 1912, when I absolutely changed the life, so to speak, I mean, in regard to art, and decided to completely forget about the nude and forget about futurisms and so forth. So these notes are with the intention of doing something else, which I didn't know at the time what it was going to be, naturally. And they were jottings, you see, on a piece of paper. Whenever an idea came to me, I would put it on a piece of paper, any piece of paper. So those papers have all kinds of shapes, torn shapes. They're pieces of paper. And then I kept them because I used them in the next thing, which was the large glass, which is now in Philadelphia.
What is the relationship of these notes to the notes in the green box?
Well, the notes in the green box are closer to the large glass. They are really, that's what I mean when I made a selection of notes after, when I did that was 40 years later. So I didn't put in that, the last one, anything much direct relationship to the glass in Philadelphia. But the green box was, all the notes almost had some kind of relationship to the glass in Philadelphia. The rest, those new notes, were completely more general, more without any destination to speak of, just an idea that comes to you when you dream a bit or read, and I put them down for eventual use, if necessary.
I know that they're divided into certain headings, and some of them are called speculations.
Yes.
And some of the speculations particularly struck me. There was one that said, make a painting or sculpture as one winds up a reel of moving picture film. Or another example, buy a dictionary and cross out the words to be crossed out. Did you actually carry out many of these ideas?
No, never.
No.
Never, exactly. But you see, all these notes also had almost a common character. They're always written in the infinitive tense. You see, à l'infinitif in French means, in the infinitive, it means to do things, eventually to do this, to make it,
Yes.
which I never did.
One of the most interesting group of ideas, and for me, the most difficult to comprehend, deal with the fourth dimension.
Yes, this is also a little sin of mine, because I'm not a mathematician, and I'm reading now a book on the fourth dimension, and notice how child and naive I am about that fourth dimension, that I just jotted down these notes thinking I could add something to it, but I can see that I'm really a little too naive for this kind
But
of way.
maybe you brought another perspective to it.
I don't think so.
No?
But anyway, it doesn't matter.
Well, I don't know whether you consider this more successful or not, but you did propose a series of things to be looked at with one eye, either
Yes.
the left or the right. Did you ever decide on a particular series?
No, but there's another painting in the Museum of Modern Art here, which has the name that you just said, to be looked at for an hour with one eye. That's about all, I think, 3 or 4. And of course, people sometimes try, and I just tell them not to do it, because there's nothing to look at except exhaustion.
Incidentally, could you tell me a little bit about the extent of your experiments with optics?
Yes, this was around 1920 when I made designs, a spiral like a spiral, and giving the idea of the corkscrew, and when it turns, giving it the third dimension. In other words, from a flat drawing, turning, the design begins to come up to you. In other words, you create a third dimension, optical, which is interested me very much. And then in 1934, I went on further from abstract drawings, which were spirals alone. I did in 1934 reconstituted the object. They were the fish in a bowl turning.
Was that what was referred to as the roto relief?
That's it. That's the name of it. It's a relief obtained by rotation. That's what the original of the word. And I did 12 drawings at that time and published it, and even had the nerve to show it in a big international fair for gadgets. And I had a whole, what they call a stand with electric motors making those things turn, hoping that people would buy them. They were very cheap too.
Where was that?
In Paris. And of course, in the course of a month, I sold one. And I had a secretary doing this. I couldn't stay that all day. So it was a pure flop.
Has this idea of creating this dimensional figure emerging been done since? I haven't seen it anywhere.
No, we have seen some in garages. When they want to advertise something, they put a big spiral of red, green, and all colors turning. And they do get the effect, about not quite as well.
I know today in interest in optics, they're concerned with things like dazzle and moire effects.
Yes, that's a new
Yeah,
new
you
thing.
weren't concerned with those things.
Except that I had once, I said in those notes in the green box, speaking of the system, Lincoln Wilson. This was because I had seen in a shop somewhere an advertisement of those two faces, the face of Lincoln on one side and the face of Wilson on the other side. And when you looked on the left, you would see Lincoln. When you looked on the right, you see Wilson. And I call that the system Lincoln Wilson, which is the same idea as the moire. You see, because those lines have two facets. And if you look at one facet, you see something. If you see the other facets, you see the other person.
I see. What did you use in the way of optics or any optical object in your film Anemic Cinema?
Well, that was the same thing. It was the same that I did in 1925, before I did the roto relief. But it was the same vein, so to speak. I mean, it was the same sequence of idea, because it was spiral, most of it, plus a sentence, a spiralic sentence too, it was made of puns, plain, very amusing puns. And there would be a pun, and then an image, and then a pun image 12 times.
What did the name mean?
Anemic Cinema, which is an anagram, anemic being the anagram of cinema, same letters.
I see. Was that was the only film you ever made?
The only one, and I didn't even call it a film because the idea was the effect, not the film being only a medium to carry the idea.
This leads me to the thought of motion once again in the bicycle wheel. And most of the literature about the ready-mades has been so concerned with the philosophical motivations that there's been very little discussion about their actual character. Do you feel, possibly in retrospect, that there is a great similarity, a great stylistic similarity
with
in the ready-mades themselves from one to the other?
Oh, yes. I mean, there's not plastic, not visual, if you want to say. But the idea is the choice of a manufactured object, or I think a ready-made object. You can choose many a day if you want, but the thing was to choose one that you were not attracted to it for its shape or anything. You see, it was through a feeling of indifference toward it that I would choose it, you see. And that was difficult because anything becomes beautiful if you look at it long enough. In other words, that bottle dryer, you see, which at the time I did it was not especially interesting in shape or anything. But nowadays, it's reproduced in all the sculpture primers, you know. And the people about sculpture think it's a good piece of sculpture, and they
Yes,
like
that's
it.
right.
They say it's beautiful.
Mhm.
So it was not for this beautiful that I chose it.
It's very interesting. I myself have the feeling that, say, the hat rack
Yes.
and the glass ampule
Yeah.
and even the fountain
Yes, exactly.
have a similarity in the sense of a kind of beauty of line.
Exactly, but that was not the intention at all.
But the intention was not, on the other hand, for them to be ugly either.
No, neither one. No.
No.
Indifference. You see, there is a form of indifference in life. After all, we are indifferent to many things, aren't we? So we don't. In that case of painting, especially or art in general, it's always a matter of taste. You see, a painter paints and applies his taste to what he paints, and in that case, it was to get rid of that intention or feeling, and completely obnubilate the existence of taste, bad or good or only indifference.
I see.